The C-123 provider sits on the tarmac, engines idling. It is not a bomber, it carries no missiles, no napalm canisters, no conventional ordnance, but the 6 1,000-gallon tanks bolted to its belly contain something far more persistent than high explosives. The liquid inside is thick, orange-brown, smelling faintly of diesel and something chemical, something wrong. The crew chief checks the spray bars mounted under the wings and tail. They are agricultural equipment, the same apparatus used by crop dusters over Iowa corn fields, but this is not Iowa, this is Vietnam, and what they are about to spray is not fertilizer. The mission is called Operation Ranch Hand. The motto, stenciled on the side of the aircraft, reads, "Only you can prevent forests." It is a dark joke, a twisted inversion of Smokey the Bear. The men who fly these missions do not see themselves as agents of ecological destruction, they see themselves as problem solvers. The jungle is the problem, the jungle hides the enemy, remove the jungle, expose the enemy. It is logic built on industrial agriculture, applied to warfare, and it will poison 3 countries for generations. The first spray run targets Route 15, a main supply corridor northeast of Saigon. The C-123 drops to 150 feet, the spray booms activate, a fog of herbicide trails behind the aircraft, settling on the canopy like toxic rain. The trees do not die immediately, death takes weeks. First, the leaves yellow, then they curl, then they fall. What was once triple canopy jungle, so dense that sunlight never touched the ground, becomes a skeletal graveyard of gray trunks and dead earth. The Viet Cong can no longer hide there, but neither can anything else live there. This is the beginning. Before we can understand the horror of what Operation Ranch Hand became, we must understand the twisted logic that birthed it. We must go back further, to the laboratories of corporate America, where the chemicals of agricultural revolution were waiting to become weapons of war. The Herbicide Industrial Complex, Fort Detrick, Maryland, 1943. The science of killing plants is not new. Farmers have been fighting weeds since the invention of agriculture, but the industrialization of herbicides begins in World War II, not on farms, but in military laboratories. The United States, preparing for a potential invasion of Japan, fears starvation as a defensive weapon. If the Japanese can destroy American crops, they can break the logistics chain. The War Department funds research into chemical agents that can kill rice paddies, destroy wheat fields, and create artificial famines. The research is conducted at Fort Detrick, the same facility that studies biological weapons. The scientists are chemists from DuPont, Dow Chemical, and Monsanto. They are brilliant men, products of the American university system, believers in the power of industrial chemistry to solve any problem. They synthesize compounds that mimic plant hormones, causing uncontrolled growth that tears the plant apart from within. The most promising compounds are phenoxy herbicides, 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T. These chemicals are evolutionary in agriculture. Sprayed on a field, they kill broadleaf weeds but leave grasses like wheat and corn untouched. The post-war farming boom is built on them. American grain production explodes. The Green Revolution spreads these chemicals across the world. They are seen as tools of progress, miracle compounds that free humanity from the backbreaking labor of manual weeding. But the chemists know something else. When 2,4-D and 2,4,5-T are mixed in equal parts, the compound becomes far more aggressive. It kills everything, trees, shrubs, vines, mangroves. The mixture is given a color code based on the stripe on the storage drums, Agent Orange. The military files the research away. The war ends, Japan surrenders before the agricultural weapons are deployed, but the research does not disappear. It sits in filing cabinets at Fort Detrick, waiting for the next war. The Jungle Problem, Saigon, 1961. President No Din Diem has a problem. His government controls the cities, but the countryside belongs to the Viet Cong. The insurgents move through the jungle like ghosts. They use the forest canopy as camouflage, the undergrowth as fortification. The South Vietnamese army, trained by the Americans in conventional warfare, cannot find them. The jungle is an ally to the guerrilla. It must be neutralized. Diem's advisors suggest herbicides. They have seen the agricultural revolution in the United States. They know that American chemicals can control nature. The initial proposal is limited. Spray herbicides along the roads and power lines to deny the Viet Cong ambush cover. It is framed as a defensive measure, a clearing operation. no different than mowing the grass on a highway median. The request reaches Washington. President Kennedy is skeptical. The use of chemical agents in warfare carries historical stigma. The Geneva Protocol of 1925 banned chemical weapons after the horrors of mustard gas in World War I, but Kennedy's advisors parsed the language. Herbicides are not chemical weapons, they are defoliants. They don't kill people directly, they kill plants. The legal distinction is thin, but it is enough. In November 1961, Kennedy approves the use of herbicides in Vietnam. The operation is classified. The chemicals are not referred to as weapons but as agents. The mission is not called chemical warfare but vegetation control. The euphemisms pile up, linguistic barriers erected between the action and its consequences. The Ranch Hand Squadron, the men who sprayed death. The 12th Air Commando Squadron is activated at Langley Air Force Base. The men selected for ranch hand duty are not combat pilots, they are cargo pilots, transport specialists, men trained to fly supply runs and troop movements. They volunteer for this mission because they are told it is safe, boring even, flying a crop duster. The recruiters say, you won't see any action. The reality is different. The C-123 Provider is a twin-engine cargo plane, slow, lumbering, designed to carry supplies, modified for herbicide spraying. It becomes one of the most vulnerable aircraft in the war. To achieve proper saturation, the spray runs must be conducted at 150 feet above the ground, traveling at 130 knots. This is the kill zone for small arms fire. A farmer with a bolt-action rifle can hit a C-123 on a spray run. The crews know this. They armor the cockpit with steel plates, they wear flak jackets in the 100-degree heat, they fly in formations of 3, with fighter escorts, 1 Sky Raiders armed with napalm and rockets, but the escorts cannot protect them from ground fire during the spray run. The aircraft are too low, too slow, too exposed. The psychological profile of a ranch hand pilot is distinct. They are not thrill seekers, they are fatalists. They accept a mission that is statistically suicidal, flown in a plane that cannot defend itself, spraying a chemical whose long-term effects are unknown. They develop a dark camaraderie, a culture of gallows humor. Their unit patch features a hand holding a spray nozzle. Their parties at Tan Son Nhut are legendary. Alcohol, exhaustion, and the knowledge that every mission might be the last. Between 1962 and 1971, Ranch Hand will fly over 19,000 sorties. They will spray approximately 20 million gallons of herbicide over 4-5 million acres of Vietnamese land. That is an area larger than the state of Massachusetts. They will lose aircraft to ground fire, to mechanical failure, to the corrosive effects of the chemicals themselves eating through fuel lines and hydraulic systems, and they will breathe the mist. They will bathe in it when the wind shifts. They will absorb it through their skin. And decades later, they will die of cancers that the government will refuse to acknowledge. The Rainbow Agents, the chemistry of control. Agent Orange is the most famous, but it is not the only chemical deployed. The military develops an entire spectrum of herbicides, each color-coded by the stripe on the 55-gallon drums. Agent Orange, 2,4-D and 2,4-5-T, the workhorse, designed to defoliate trees and destroy crops, 13 million gallons sprayed. Agent White, Picloram and 2,4-D, more persistent than Orange, used when the military wanted the land dead for longer, 2 million gallons sprayed. Agent Blue, Cacodyllic acid. An organoarsenical compound designed specifically to kill rice. It contains arsenic. It is sprayed directly on rice paddies to starve the Viet Cong, 4 million gallons sprayed. Agent Pink, Agent Green, Agent Purple, early formulations, used before Orange became standardized. Purple is later banned when its toxicity becomes undeniable, but not before hundreds of thousands of gallons are sprayed. The chemicals are manufactured in the United States by corporations that are household names: Dow Chemical, Monsanto, Diamond Shamrock, Hercules Inc., Uniroyal. These companies are patriots, fulfilling defense contracts, supplying the war effort. They produce the herbicides in massive quantities, shipped in drums to Johnston Atoll in the Pacific, then transported to Vietnam. But there is a contaminant. During the synthesis of 2,4,5-T, if the temperature is not carefully controlled, a byproduct forms. It is called 2,3,7,8 tetrachlorodibenzo, P-dioxin, TCDD, dioxin. Dioxin is one of the most toxic substances ever created by humans. It is measured in parts per trillion. A single drop can poison a city's water supply. It causes cancer, birth defects, immune system collapse, and genetic mutations that persist across generations. It does not break down. It binds to soil, to fat tissue, to the food chain. It is forever. The military knows about the dioxin contamination. Internal memos from Dow Chemical and the Department of Defense reference it as early as 1965, but the war is escalating, the demand for herbicides is increasing, the production lines cannot slow down to ensure purity, the acceptable contamination levels are set not by science but by logistics. The chemicals are shipped with dioxin concentrations that are, in some batches, 50 times higher than the already dangerous standard. The men flying the planes are not told, the Vietnamese villagers are not warned, the contamination is classified. The strategy of starvation, denying food to the enemy. By 1965, Operation Ranch Hand expands beyond defoliation, the military develops a new target set, food crops. The logic is brutal and efficient. The Viet Cong live off the land, they tax the peasants, taking a share of the rice harvest. If there is no harvest, the Viet Cong starve, or they are forced to rely on the Ho Chi Minh Trail for resupply, which increases their vulnerability to interdiction. Agent Blue, the arsenic-based herbicide, is deployed against rice paddies. The spray runs are flown at the exact moment when the rice is ripening, maximizing damage. A single pass can destroy an entire season's crop. The paddies turn brown, the stalks wither, the grain rots. The military claims these are Viet Cong crops, grown in contested areas, harvested to feed the insurgency, but rice paddies do not have flags. A field is a field. The spray does not distinguish between a peasant forced to pay taxes to the Viet Cong and a peasant loyal to Saigon. It does not care if children will starve. Estimates vary, but it is believed that between 500,000 and 1 million Vietnamese civilians suffered acute food shortages directly caused by crop destruction. Malnutrition weakens the immune system. Diseases that a healthy body could fight, dysentery, tuberculosis, dengue fever, become killers. Children are especially vulnerable. The death toll from starvation and starvation-related disease is impossible to calculate precisely, but it is measured in tens of thousands at minimum. The policy of crop destruction is controversial even within the U.S. military. Some commanders see it as a war crime, a violation of the laws of war that prohibit the deliberate starvation of civilian populations. Others see it as a necessary evil, a weapon that targets the enemy's logistics. The debate is settled by the chain of command. General William Westmoreland, commander of MACV, approves the expanded use of herbicides. The spray missions continue. But the Viet Cong adapt. They disperse their food supplies. They force the peasants to replant. They dig deeper into the population, embedding themselves so thoroughly that any attack on them becomes an attack on the civilians. The crop destruction does not starve the insurgency, it starves the people. And it drives them into the arms of the Viet Cong. The ecological apocalypse, killing the mangroves. The most concentrated spraying occurs in the Mekong Delta and the Rung Sat Special Zone. This is a landscape of mangrove forests, tidal swamps, and river systems. It is nearly impassable to conventional forces. The Viet Cong use it as a sanctuary, moving supplies by sampan through the waterways, disappearing into the tangle of roots and mud. The U.S. Navy wants it dead. Mangroves are uniquely vulnerable to herbicides. Unlike upland forests that can survive partial defoliation, mangroves exist in a delicate balance with the tidal ecosystem. Kill the trees, and the entire structure collapses. The roots that stabilize the shoreline rot away, the sediment washes into the sea, the nursery grounds for fish and shrimp disappear. Between 1965 and 1970, approximately 36% of the mangrove forests in South Vietnam are sprayed with Agent Orange. Some areas receive multiple applications, saturation bombing with chemicals. The forests die, the land becomes a wasteland of gray stumps and stagnant water. The ecological consequences are catastrophic. The mangroves are the foundation of the coastal food web. They provide habitat for juvenile fish, shrimp, crabs, and mollusks. When the mangroves die, the fisheries collapse. The coastal villages that relied on fishing for protein and income are devastated. The people have no food, they have no livelihood, they become refugees. But the damage goes deeper. Mangrove soil is rich in organic matter and sulfides. When exposed to air, it becomes acidic, acid sulfate soil. It is so toxic that nothing can grow in it for decades. The areas that were sprayed become biological deserts, dead zones where even weeds refuse to take root. Scientific studies conducted in the 1980s and 1990s reveal the scale of the destruction of the mangrove forests sprayed during the war. Only 20% have regenerated, the rest remain barren. The recovery time for a heavily sprayed area is estimated at 100 to 200 years. That means children born today will die of old age before the forests return. The US military never intended to commit ecological genocide, but intention is irrelevant, the result is the same. Part 2. The human cost. Phuoc Thi Province, 1967, the village that disappeared. The village of Phuoc Thi sits in a valley surrounded by rubber plantations and secondary jungle. It is not a Viet Cong stronghold, it is not a contested area, it is simply in the way. The military grid map designates the surrounding forest as a free fire zone, an area where anything that moves is considered hostile. On a Tuesday morning in August, the villagers hear the sound of aircraft engines. The C-123s come in low, flying in formation. The spray begins, the mist drifts down through the canopy, settling on the rubber trees, the vegetable gardens, the banana groves. It settles on the thatch roofs, it settles on the water buffalo drinking from the stream, it settles on the children playing in the dirt. The villagers do not know what it is. Some think it is rain, others think it is smoke from a fire. By evening, people begin to feel sick, headaches, nausea, skin rashes. The village elders send a delegation to the district headquarters to complain. They are told it is harmless, a pesticide to kill mosquitoes. Go home. Within a week, the trees begin to die. The rubber plantation, the village's only source of income, turns brown. The leaves fall, the sap stops flowing, the banana trees wither, the vegetable gardens rot. The villagers have no food. They slaughter the water buffalo, but the meat tastes wrong, chemical, bitter. People who eat it become violently ill. By the end of the month, the village is abandoned. The people walk south, carrying what they can, leaving behind the land their families have worked for generations. They join the refugee camps swelling around Saigon, landless peasants with no skills for city life. Phuoc Thi is not unique. Multiply this scene by 1,000. This is the hidden face of Operation Ranch Hand, not a military operation, but a forced migration, the destruction of rural Vietnam, the creation of a generation of environmental refugees. The birth defects, the horror revealed in the maternity wards. Tu Du Hospital, Saigon, Dr. Nguyen Thi Ngoc Phuong is an obstetrician. She has delivered thousands of babies, but starting in the late 1960s, she begins to see things that do not appear in her medical textbooks. Babies born without eyes, babies with their brains growing outside their skulls, babies with missing limbs, fused fingers, cleft palates so severe they cannot breathe, babies with tumors the size of grapefruits, babies that are not recognizable as human, twisted masses of tissue that live for minutes, gasping, before they die. Dr. Phuong starts keeping records. She photographs the birth defects. She maps the locations where the mothers lived during pregnancy. A pattern emerges. The areas with the highest rates of birth defects are the areas that were sprayed. She tries to publish her findings. The South Vietnamese government, dependent on American aid, suppresses the research. The US military denies any connection. The chemical companies issue statements saying their products are safe when used as directed. Dr. Phuong is threatened. She is told to stop her research or lose her position. But the babies keep coming. The maternity wards fill with horrors. The nurses begin to refuse assignments to the neonatal unit. The psychological toll is devastating. You cannot witness this level of suffering, this perversion of birth, without it changing you. Dr. Phuong continues her research in secret. She collects tissue samples. She stores them in jars, a museum of genetic catastrophe. She knows that one day, when the war is over, when the political pressure eases, the world will need proof, so she builds the archive of the damned. The dioxin pathway, how poison enters the body. To understand the multi-generational horror of Agent Orange, you must understand dioxin's behavior at the molecular level. This is not a poison that kills quickly, this is a poison that rewrites biology. When Agent Orange is sprayed, the dioxin falls to the ground, it binds to soil particles, especially clay and organic matter, it does not break down, sunlight does not degrade it, rain does not wash it away, it sits in the soil, stable, patient, waiting. Plants absorb it through their roots, vegetables grown in contaminated soil carry dioxin in their tissues, cows eat contaminated grass, the dioxin concentrates in the fat tissue of the cow, a human eats the beef, the dioxin transfers, but it does not stop there. Dioxin is lipophilic, it loves fat, it accumulates in human fat tissue, and most importantly, it crosses the placental barrier. A pregnant woman who was exposed to Agent Orange, perhaps she walked through a sprayed field, perhaps she ate contaminated food, perhaps she drank water from a stream that drained a sprayed area, carries dioxin in her body. That dioxin enters the fetus, it interferes with cell division during the most critical phase of development, it causes mutations, it disrupts the formation of organs. The baby is born with defects. But the horror does not end there, the dioxin remains in the mother's body. When she has another child, that child is also exposed, and if that child is a daughter, she will carry the dioxin into the next generation. Dioxin has a half-life in the human body of approximately 7 to 11 years. But in the environment, in the soil, in the sediment at the bottom of ponds, it persists for decades, for centuries. This is the mechanism of the multi-generational curse. The chemical sprayed in 1967 is still causing birth defects in 2025. The lie, safe and effective. Throughout the 1960s, the official position of the U.S. government and the chemical manufacturers is consistent. The herbicides used in Vietnam are safe. They are no more dangerous than the chemicals used on American lawns. Any health effects are due to malnutrition, tropical diseases, or Viet Cong propaganda. This is a lie, and the liars know it is a lie. Internal documents from Dow Chemical, declassified decades later, show that the company's own scientists raised concerns about dioxin contamination as early as 1964. They warned that exposure to high levels of TCDD could cause chloracne, liver damage, and birth defects. The company buried the research, they continued production, they fulfilled the military contracts. The U.S. Department of Defense conducts its own studies. In 1967, the Bionetics Research Laboratory is contracted to test the herbicides on laboratory animals. The results are unambiguous. Mice and rats exposed to Agent Orange during pregnancy produce offspring with massive rates of birth defects, cleft palates, missing eyes, deformed skeletons, kidney malformations. The rates are dose-dependent, the more exposure, the worse the defects. The report is classified, it is stamped, for official use only, it is not released to the public, it is not shared with the ranch hand pilots, it is not shared with the South Vietnamese government. The spraying continues. In 1969, a version of the Bionetics study is leaked to the press. The revelation causes a scandal. Scientists and anti-war activists demand the immediate cessation of herbicide spraying, but the war machine is slow to stop. The military argues that stopping ranch hand would give a tactical advantage to the enemy. They commission more studies, studies designed to produce ambiguous results, studies that can be used to delay action. It is not until 1971 that Operation Ranch Hand is officially suspended. By then, the damage is done, the land is poisoned, the people are poisoned, and the poison will outlive everyone involved in the decision to spray it. The veterans, the betrayal of the ranch hand crews. Captain John "Skip" Harris flies 150 spray missions for ranch hand. He is a patriot, he believes in the mission, he trusts his government when they tell him the chemicals are safe, he breathes the mist, he wipes it from his face, he washes his flight suit in water contaminated with runoff from the herbicide drums, he absorbs dioxin through every pore. He comes home in 1972, he is 29 years old. By 1980, he is dying of soft tissue sarcoma, a rare cancer linked to dioxin exposure. He applies for VA benefits, he is denied. The VA says there is no proven connection between herbicide exposure and cancer. He appeals, he is denied again. He dies in 1982, his widow receives nothing. This scene repeats thousands of times. The ranch hand pilots, the ground crews who loaded the herbicide, the soldiers who walked through sprayed jungles, they come home sick, they develop cancers at rates far exceeding the general population: leukemia, Hodgkin's lymphoma, prostate cancer, respiratory cancers, their children are born with birth defects, spina bifida, cleft palates, developmental disabilities. The VA denies their claims. The burden of proof is placed on the veteran. You must prove that your cancer was caused by Agent Orange exposure, but how do you prove causation? The exposure was decades ago. The military did not keep precise records of which units operated in which sprayed areas. The veterans have no documentation. The chemical companies hide behind government contractor immunity. We only made what the military ordered. We are not liable. The government hides behind plausible deniability. The science is inconclusive. We cannot establish a definitive causal link. The veterans organize, they form advocacy groups, they sue. The lawsuit, filed in 1979, is a class action representing millions of veterans exposed to Agent Orange. The case drags on for years. In 1984, the chemical companies settle out of court for $180 million. It sounds like a lot until you divide it by the number of claimants. Each veteran receives, on average, a few $1,000s, a pittance for a life destroyed, for children born suffering. But the real betrayal is the denial, the institutional refusal to acknowledge what was done to these men. It takes until 1991 for Congress to pass the Agent Orange Act, which finally establishes a presumption of service connection for certain diseases. But even then, the list of covered conditions is limited, political, shaped by budget concerns rather than science. The ranch hand crews were poisoned by their own government, and then they were abandoned. Part 3, The Aftermath. The Return, 2024, The Poison That Will Not Die. Nguyen Van Ton is 34 years old. He was born 2 decades after the war ended. He has never seen an American soldier. He has never heard the sound of a C-123, but he carries the war in his genes. Ton lives in a Loei Valley, Thua Tien Hu Province. This area was part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It was sprayed repeatedly, saturated with Agent Orange. The military called it War Zone D. It is still a war zone, but the enemy is invisible. Ton's father was born in 1970. He grew up drinking water from streams that drained sprayed hillsides. He ate fish from contaminated ponds. The dioxin entered his body, lodged in his tissues, damaged his DNA. When Ton was conceived, he inherited that damage. Ton was born with severe disabilities. His spine is twisted, his legs do not develop properly, he cannot walk. He has the mind of an 8-year-old in an adult body. He requires constant care. His family cannot work because they must care for him. They live in poverty. The Vietnamese government estimates there are 400,000 people like Ton, victims of Agent Orange exposure born after the war ended. The actual number is likely higher, because many families hide their disabled children out of shame, and many disabled children die young without ever being documented. These are the third-generation victims. Their grandparents walked through sprayed jungles, their parents absorbed the poison through the food chain, and they are born suffering for a war they did not fight, in a conflict they do not understand. There is no compensation, there is no acknowledgement. The U.S. government does not recognize Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange. The official position is that any health effects among the Vietnamese population cannot be definitively linked to herbicide exposure. The burden of proof is impossible to meet. The cleanup that never happened. After the fall of Saigon in 1975, the victorious North Vietnamese government surveys the environmental damage. They find, in addition to the ecological destruction, something else: dioxin hotspots. These are areas where herbicide drums were stored, where spray equipment was washed, where concentrated chemicals spilled into the soil. The contamination at these sites is not measured in parts per billion. It is measured in parts per thousand. The worst site is Da Nang Air Base. This was a major hub for ranch hand operations. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of Agent Orange were stored here. The herbicide leached into the ground, it seeped into the water table, it flowed into Da Nang Harbor. In 2006, Canadian scientists conduct soil testing around the former air base. They find dioxin concentrations up to 365 times higher than international safety limits. The entire area is a Superfund site, but there is no Superfund. The Vietnamese government lacks the technology and resources to remediate the contamination. Dioxin cleanup requires thermal desorption, a process that heats contaminated soil to 600 degrees Celsius to break down the toxin. It is expensive, energy-intensive, and slow. Each cubic meter of soil costs hundreds of dollars to treat. For decades, nothing happens. The people living near the contaminated sites continue to drink the water, they continue to eat the fish, they continue to have children with birth defects. It is not until 2012 that the U.S. government, under pressure from veterans groups and international activists, agrees to fund a limited cleanup of Da Nang. The project takes 7 years and costs $110 million. It remediates 90,000 cubic meters of soil. It is a drop in the ocean. There are dozens of other hotspots that remain untouched. The estimated cost to fully remediate all Agent Orange contamination in Vietnam is between $10 billion and $50 billion. The U.S. has contributed less than $300 million. The poison remains. The scientific reckoning, what we know now. Modern toxicology has confirmed what the early whistleblowers suspected. Dioxin is one of the most potent carcinogens and teratogens known to science. The mechanisms are well understood. Endocrine disruption. Dioxin mimics hormones, binding to receptors and altering gene expression. This disrupts development, especially in fetuses. Immune suppression. Dioxin damages the thymus gland, reducing the body's ability to fight infection and cancer. Epigenetic damage. Dioxin causes changes in DNA methylation patterns. These changes can be inherited, passing the effects of exposure to future generations even without direct exposure. Cancer promotion. Dioxin does not directly mutate DNA, but it promotes the growth of existing mutations, accelerating the development of tumors. Studies of the ranch hand veterans have provided a grim dataset. Compared to the general population, they show elevated rates of Type 2 diabetes, 200% increase. Ischemic heart disease, 50% increase. Peripheral neuropathy, 300% increase. Chronic lymphocytic leukemia, 500% increase. Prostate cancer, 150% increase. Studies of Vietnamese populations in sprayed areas show even worse outcomes, because their exposure was prolonged and they received no medical care. In some heavily sprayed districts, the rate of birth defects is 10 times the national average. The science is no longer ambiguous, the connection is proven, but proving it did not bring justice, it only revealed the scale of what was done. The legal battle, the case that failed. In 2004, the Vietnamese Association of Victims of Agent Orange filed a lawsuit in U.S. federal court against the chemical manufacturers, Dow Chemical, Monsanto, and others. The plaintiffs were Vietnamese civilians, people who had never fought against the United States, people who were simply in the way when the poison fell. The case argued that the use of Agent Orange constituted a war crime under international law. It argued that the chemical companies knew their products were contaminated with dioxin. It argued that they had a duty to warn, and they failed. The chemical companies responded with a simple defense: government contractor immunity. They were following orders, the military told them what to make and how to make it, they cannot be held liable for the consequences. The court agreed. In 2005, Judge Jack B. Weinstein dismissed the case. He ruled that herbicides were not considered chemical weapons under international law at the time they were used. He ruled that the contamination with dioxin was unintentional. He ruled that the chemical companies were protected by wartime immunity. The decision was upheld on appeal. The case was dead. The legal logic is sound, perhaps, within the narrow confines of jurisprudence, but the moral logic is insane. A company manufactures a product they know to be poisonous. They sell it to the government sprays it on millions of people, those people suffer for generations, and no one is held accountable. Justice, as a concept, becomes meaningless. The comparison, what industrial agriculture became. Here is the reveal, the turning insight that reframes everything. Agent Orange was not an aberration, it was not a perversion of peaceful technology into a weapon of war, it was the logical endpoint of industrial agriculture's war on nature. Consider the language: pesticides, herbicides, insecticides. These are not neutral terms, they are terms of extermination. The suffix "cide" means to kill: homicide, genocide, pesticide. Industrial agriculture views the natural world as an enemy. Weeds are the enemy, insects are the enemy, fungi are the enemy. The goal is total control, total domination, the creation of a monoculture where only the desired crop exists and everything else is dead. The chemicals developed for this war, DDT, paraquat, atrazine, glyphosate, are poisons, they are designed to kill. The industry assures us they are safe when used as directed, but Agent Orange was also used as directed. The ranch hand crews followed the manual, they applied the herbicide at the recommended rate, and it poisoned a country. The difference between a pesticide and a chemical weapon is not the chemical, it is the target. Spray it on a soybean field to kill weeds, and it is agriculture. Spray it on a jungle to kill the enemy's cover, and it is warfare. But the chemical does not know the difference, the dioxin does not care. And the same companies that manufactured Agent Orange continue to manufacture agricultural chemicals today. Monsanto, now owned by Bayer, produces Roundup, the world's most widely used herbicide. Dow Chemical, now merged with DuPont, produces 2,4-D, one of the components of Agent Orange. These chemicals are sprayed on millions of acres of American farmland, they are sprayed on lawns, golf courses, roadsides. We are told they are safe, we were told that before. The memory hole, how history forgets. In the American consciousness, the Vietnam War is helicopters, jungle, rock and roll soundtracks, and traumatized veterans. It is Apocalypse Now and Platoon. It is the wall in Washington, D.C. with 58,000 names. It is a lesson about the limits of military power, the quagmire, the mistake. But Operation Ranch Hand is a footnote. Agent Orange is mentioned in passing, a scandal from the 70s, a controversy that was settled decades ago. The Vietnamese victims are invisible, the environmental destruction is forgotten, the multi-generational poisoning continues, but it happens far away, to people who do not speak English, in a country we stopped thinking about. This erasure is not accidental, it is structural. To remember Agent Orange fully, to understand its implications, forces uncomfortable questions. If we did this in Vietnam, what are we doing now? If our agricultural chemicals became weapons of war, are our weapons of war not just industrial chemicals? If dioxin poisoned 3 generations of Vietnamese, what are the forever chemicals, PFAS, PCBs, atrazine, doing to us? These questions threaten the foundational myths of American exceptionalism and technological progress, so the questions are not asked, the history is simplified, the victims are forgotten. But the poison does not forget, it sits in the soil, patient, waiting, outliving the memory of the men who dropped it. Part 4, The Reckoning. The Unacknowledged Genocide. Let us use the word that has been avoided throughout this history, genocide. The legal definition, established by the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, includes deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. The spraying of Agent Orange on populated areas, the destruction of food crops, the contamination of water supplies, the creation of conditions that cause birth defects across generations, these are acts that fit the definition. The intent may have been military, but the result is the same, a population is being destroyed, not by bullets, but by chemistry. The US government will never acknowledge this. To do so would open the door to reparations on a scale that would bankrupt the Treasury, it would establish precedent for accountability in all future chemical warfare, it would shatter the legal fictions that allow modern warfare to continue. But acknowledgement is not required for truth, the dead do not need permission to be counted, the poison do not need a court verdict to suffer. The modern parallels, the poison continues. In 2025, glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, is found in the breast milk of American mothers. Studies link it to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Monsanto, now Bayer, faces thousands of lawsuits. The company settles for billions. They admit no wrongdoing. The chemical remains on the market. In 2025, atrazine, a herbicide banned in the European Union, is still widely used in the United States. Studies show it is an endocrine disruptor, causing sexual development abnormalities in frogs at concentrations of 0.1 parts per billion. It is found in American drinking water at levels 10 to 100 times higher. In 2025, the U.S. military deploys white phosphorus in urban warfare in the Middle East. White phosphorus burns flesh to the bone, it causes injuries that cannot heal. It is legal because it is classified as an incendiary device, not a chemical weapon. The distinction is semantic, the suffering is real. The lesson of Agent Orange is not that it was a unique atrocity, the lesson is that it was not unique at all, it was the industrialization of agriculture applied to the industrialization of death, and that process continues. What the jungle remembers. Return to the A Shao Valley. Stand in the place where the jungle was. It is not there. 60 years after the spraying, the forest has not returned, the soil is too damaged, the seed bank is dead. In place of the triple canopy rainforest, there is bamboo and grass, pioneer species that can tolerate the toxicity. The animals are gone, the tigers that once hunted here are extinct in Vietnam, the elephants are reduced to a remnant population in isolated reserves, the birds, the primates, the uncountable insects that formed the web of life, they died with the trees. This is the ghost forest, this is the landscape that industrial warfare created. It is a monument, not to victory or defeat, but to the arrogance of men who believed they could control nature by poisoning it. And in the villages surrounding the valley, children are still born with twisted spines, with missing limbs, with minds that cannot develop. They are born into a world that does not remember why they suffer. Their grandparents walked through the mist, their parents ate the fish, and they inherit the war. The conclusion, the price of forgetting. The story of Operation Ranch Hand is told as a cautionary tale. We made mistakes in Vietnam, we learned from them, it will never happen again. But it is happening again. The chemicals are different, the justifications are different, the targets are different, but the logic is the same: control through chemistry, domination through poison, the belief that we can wage war on nature without consequences. The Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange number in the millions. They received no apology, they received no compensation, they were written out of history. Their suffering is a cost externalized, a liability denied, a problem too expensive to solve. The lesson is not that Agent Orange was uniquely evil, the lesson is that it was normal. It was the application of standard industrial processes to standard military objectives. The herbicide companies were not mad scientists, they were respectable corporations filling government contracts. The pilots were not war criminals, they were patriots following orders. The generals were not monsters, they were professionals solving tactical problems. And that is the horror. Evil does not require malice, it only requires systems, bureaucracies, euphemisms, and the ability to not see the consequences of your actions. Agent Orange was not a failure of morality, it was a success of logistics. The military wanted the jungle dead, the companies wanted profit, the politicians wanted victory, everyone got what they wanted. Except the people who breathed the mist, except the children born without eyes, except the forests that will not return, except the soil that will not heal. The poison falls, the leaves die, the earth remembers, and somewhere, in a hospital in central Vietnam, a child is born screaming, twisted, doomed, carrying in his cells the signature of a war that ended before his parents were born. This is the legacy, this is the cost, this is what we did. And we called it progress.